tonight I'm going to talk about quality. The stuff that goes into the reviews that we do, Cochrane or otherwise, but clearly, most importantly, Cochrane. And what I'm going to say is that we, Cochrane, should think much more carefully about the work we do, given the studies we have in front of us. And to cut to the chase, what I'm going to say is that a lot of the stuff that chews up vast amounts of our time is rubbish. And we should not commit so much time to this stuff that is not deserving of that attention. Right, so let's think about Cochrane. Respect. Cochrane is an absolutely fabulous initiative. It's a fabulous organisation. We heard a moment ago that Cochrane reviews are directly influencing guideline recommendations, and so they should. Cochrane and its methods are recognised as the leading way of systematically collating a body of evidence and then making decisions based around that evidence, or putting it into a decision-making process. The methodological processes that we go through in a Cochrane review are the gold standard methods. Where Cochrane goes, others follow. Cochrane is extremely influential. One of the things I'm going to say is that we should be even more influential. We should be banging another drum much harder than we currently do. Now, what I'm going to talk about is risk of bias, and this is the Cochrane.org website last Saturday. And you'll see up there is this sort of blue thing, latest Cochrane evidence. And what I thought I would do is just look at whatever came up in that list. So I've looked at 4, and I'm going to show you the risk of bias assessments for 4 that came in this list. So I had no idea what they were going to be. Let's just click on some. Here is the first. This is a review by somebody called Feinberg. Actually, I'll show you the numbers later. It's a massive review. What they were interested in was nutritional support for people at risk of nutritional problems in hospital. And let's look at this graph. Now, this is using the Cochrane risk of bias tool. What we're after is green. There's actually quite a bit of green. Red is bad. That's the high risk of bias on that particular domain. There's a lot of yellow. We don't know. We don't know. It's uncertain. So that picture is actually, there's some that is low risk of bias, it's green. There's a bit of red, there's a lot of uncertainty. So that was the first one I looked at. The next one is by a group called Blood. And they were looking at brain dysfunction, which is linked to liver disease. This is actually a much smaller review. Look at that, they've got a lot of green, great. They've got a lot of red, high risk of bias, and a little bit of uncertainty, a different sort of picture. The next one that I've looked at is this one called Wakai. What he and his colleagues were looking at was corneal abrasion, so an injury to the eye, and it's actually about painkillers. Also a relatively small review, some green, bit of red, quite a lot of uncertainty. And the last one I looked at was this one, Visa. This is also a big review, done mostly in low and middle income countries, and it's looking at micronutrients in HIV. And if we look at that, quite a lot of green, bit of red, a lot of uncertainty. Now this picture is, I think, a bit mixed. There's a lot of uncertainty. That's a message that comes across quite strongly. The reason I'm actually stood up here talking about quality is actually because I'm going to show you a picture from my own review that we're updating right now. And what I do are trial methods. So it's not a clinical review, it's a methods review. And what I'm interested in is how might we improve recruitment to trials. And this picture is quite mixed, but there's a lot of uncertainty. There's not always a great deal of green. Our review looks like this. We've got much more green in ours. And I can tell you that our review team, we are raging at the quality, the low quality of the stuff we are dealing with. And our situation is much better than those clinical questions. which is a surprise to me. As I said, I just looked at those, didn't choose them for any particular reason. They were just the most recent ones. Our situation here is much better than those clinical ones, which we'll see even clearer in a moment. And we are raging at the poor quality of the stuff we are having to waste our time looking at. And the situation is even worse than these clinical questions. Let's look at this summary table. Now these risk of bias assessments are mine. So they're not, I haven't taken the ones that the reviewers have done, although essentially they're the same. Or I'm a bit kinder. I've looked at the long table we often get in a Cochrane review where the domain scores are in little coloured dots. And if there's a red dot, I've said this is high risk of bias. If there's all green dots, well, it's low risk. And if there's yellow, then it's going to be uncertain. That's how I've counted these. And I'm broadly in agreement, in fact I am pretty much in agreement, or I'm kinder. Let's look at VISA. VISA, what that group did, was the one that was looking at the HIV, the micronutrients. 33 studies. There were 10,300 participants involved in those trials. One is at low risk of bias. 33 included studies, and there's one where the review authors could conclude that yes, this group has done some work and we trust their findings. We have good grounds to believe what they have found. They have made decisions which give us confidence that in this population, with this particular intervention, in this setting, their results can be believed. 10,300 people. And there was one trial in that body of evidence that says clearly to us, yes, we can believe these findings. Almost half of them, high risk of bias, which says, actually, we have good grounds to really doubt the findings of this study for one or more important reasons. Therefore, we class them as high risk of bias. We have reason to worry about whether we can believe anything they say with regard to the result, irrespective of what that is. And then, in this case, about half, we don't know, uncertain. Let's move on to the next one, Feinberg. This was an enormous review. They should get medals. 244 included studies, 28,000 people involved in that review. Now, I, in my risk of bias assessment, said there were 0 at low risk of bias and 192 at high risk of bias. The review authors say every single study in that review, every one of the 244 is high risk of bias. 28,000 people put into trials, and at the end of all that work, years of work, we have grave doubts about anything they say. 28.5, in fact, thousand people, 244 trials, a massive review, and we have grave doubts about everything in it. Let's move on to GLUD, much smaller one. GLUD was looking at brain dysfunction. 16, actually 6, low risk of bias, but more at high risk of bias. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that review in a moment. WACI, 9, 0 at low risk of bias. These two are both smaller reviews, about 1,000 participants in each of those. 4, high risk of bias, a lot of uncertainty. And my review, now bear in mind, we are raging about this poor quality stuff. We have 22 that are at low risk of bias in a body of evidence of 68 studies. We are actually in a better situation than any of these. And we are living through them. We think this is shocking. In these reviews, it surprises me that there are not massive headlines that say, stop! It's rubbish! Change what you are doing. Right, so what I wanted to do next is let's look at one of these reviews. And this is picked in no particular way. It's just what was on top of the pile of bits of paper when I'd printed stuff out. Turned out to be GLUD. Now, you don't have to worry about any of the numbers or anything. This is the only bit really. This review has 16 included studies. 15 of those are in here. It's on mortality. This is the brain dysfunction one. Mortality. Now, down here we see a little dot. If we look up there, we can see dots that sort of hover around this relative risk of 0. And we have some which are in favour of the intervention, some which are not in favour, quite wide confidence intervals. In the end, they concluded, as in fact I would, that there was no evidence one way or the other. Uncertainty. But they called this body of evidence moderate, so they use grade. We use grade a lot, we all use grade. They said this is moderate certainty of the evidence. Now I think they've been very kind. So let's briefly say why that is. If we highlight the high risk of bias studies, it looks like this. So more than half are at high risk of bias. So to my mind, if we start off with grade at high, then I think we could drop it at least 1, maybe 2 on study limitations here. Much of the evidence going into that is at high risk of bias, so I would drop it at least 1. I think there's inconsistency, because it sort of results in different directions, and there's certainly imprecision. The review authors rated it down for imprecision. So I think this is low, or thereabouts. But it's a judgment, that's the thing with grade. Ultimately, it's a judgment. But if we, as indeed the reviewers do, just look at the ones that are at low risk of bias, we get this picture. So we still see that uncertainty, that inconsistency, and we still get a result at the end where eventually we would conclude there's little or no difference overall. If we summarise it in a table, the original studies give this risk ratio here in favour of the intervention, but the confidence interval does not rule out a result in favour of the comparator. And if we just look at the low risk of bias ones, we get a summary result in favour of the comparator, but the confidence interval doesn't rule out benefit of the intervention too. And the authors did this, and they did it a different way, but they did the same sort of thing. What's the impact of shoveling out the high risk of bias ones? So what I thought was interesting here is that the estimate is in different directions, although both myself and the review authors conclude that overall that confidence interval leaves us with sufficient uncertainty to not be able to come down in favour or against. But by looking at this body of evidence, you can see that the suggestion, these are very small reviews actually, the suggestion here from the original is that the intervention is likely to be effective, whereas the suggestion here is that the intervention is likely to not be effective. Perhaps it's just underpowered. So the conclusions here, by chance, I just picked it up, might have worked out differently had I chosen another one, but the conclusion is different. At least the suggestion, the overall conclusion is uncertain. But if we're thinking about guideline recommendations, this sort of thing is important, clearly, because that gives us the suggestion that actually it doesn't work when, well, there's another way of looking at the data suggests that it does. So these sorts of things are very, very important. The authors, again, just to say, they did this sort of thing. So they did this, looked at it. But when you get to this sort of situation, you are starting to think, well, what sort of research do we now need? We have an enormous amount of uncertainty here. So we have this section in the Cochrane reviews called Research Implications. I'm just going to talk about a few of these. This is the one from Glood's review. They do a nice sensitivity analysis, as I said. So they did look at the impact of high risk, low risk bias. And they said we need additional high quality studies. I gave a little bit of guidance. It's an 88-page long review. More than half of what is in it is judged to be at high risk of bias. They give some guidance, there's a little bit more text, but not much more than that. They've said we need more high quality stuff. But broadly speaking, that's the end of it in terms of their guidance. Here is a really limp research implication. This is mine, from my old review, the recruitment review that I'm updating now. Here, we just say trialists should include evaluations. Figure it out as to what sort of evaluations. We there found about half of all the stuff that was included was at high risk of bias. And what we're saying here is, well, you should include an evaluation, try and make them a bit better. Really limp. That's what's in my current review. Not much use, in my opinion. This is the last one. This is from Feinberg. This is this giant review. 244 studies. Now they do some nice things. They do look and discuss at length the certainty of the evidence. So they talk a lot about that. They say quite nicely, please do not do trials of this sort. Give an example. And then they say something about the sorts of work that should be done in the future. But look, I don't know how long it took them to do that review, but it's over 1,400 pages. And bear in mind that the authors themselves class every single included study as being at high risk of bias. And now we have a 1,400 page of document based on what I would class as total cobblers, because it's rated at high risk of bias. I don't know how long it took them to do it. They've done a very good job. But the question is it worth it, given the raw feedstock that those review authors were working with? And that is the sort of problem that the Trial Forge initiative is trying to help to solve in its little bit of a way. How can we make the research process linked to trials more efficient? And one of the key efficiencies is, what research question should we ask? We want that to be an important topic, and we want the design to be appropriate. And at that end of the pathway of doing a trial, the research question, we need to know what the collated evidence is telling us. In other words, what we're really wanting to find are Cochrane systematic reviews that say something about this body of evidence. So that when we start moving along the trial pathway with our new trial, we are basing it on the best information that we have from what we have out there already. So Cochrane reviews, the way Cochrane reviews are written, presented, and particularly the research implications, are bang on the money for this initiative, because you can mess up royally with your research question at this end, and everything else going down there towards dissemination, waste of time. Messed up your research question, everything else does not matter. Who cares? Research question, irrelevant. Answering a question nobody's interested in. I think, as Lewis Carroll might have said, is that we, as a community, should start to get really stroppy about the quality of the research that we are being asked to synthesize, because an astonishing amount of it is total rubbish. Why is this continuing? Why is it that 28,500 people can enter into 244 trials, and at the end of that body of work, all of that goodwill, all of that time, all of that money, at the end of that, what we conclude from every single study is that we have grave doubts about absolutely everything that came out of these studies. Why is that continuing? How can that possibly be the case? So Declan, in his introduction, mentioned the DECIDE project, which is a guidelines project. But part that I was involved with directly talking to members of the public, patients. And at some point, we were very interested in how best to present issues of uncertainty to members of the public. So if there's a particular treatment option, what's the best way of presenting that information to a member of the public? And in those discussions, so we had focus groups, sometimes in fairly large groups, sometimes in very small groups. In that discussion, we just jauntily raised the possibility of, well, we can have low certainty in the evidence, or low quality research, and we can have high certainty. And then somebody said, hold on. What is this thing? Low quality research. Why is it that you guys, you researchers, are doing low quality research. What's that all about? Why are you spending our money, taxpayers' money, doing stuff that is low quality? This concept of low certainty in the evidence, poor design, was completely alien to members of the public, and why should it be anything else? Why shouldn't the public expect the research that they fund to be of high quality? Asking an important question, choosing the right design, doing the analysis appropriately, and presenting it in a way that makes sense. It's entirely logical that the public should expect 244 trials of high certainty in the evidence, of low risk of bias. Why would they not expect that? They were quite right to stop us and say, what is this thing? Low quality research. Why are you doing that? It's a good question. Why are we doing that? And I think Cochrane has a voice here that we are not using. Certainly not enough. So I think we should start thinking about things like this. How much time should we dedicate to dealing with studies that are at high risk of bias? Now, one thing to emphasize is I do methods reviews. Things like recruitment, things like retention to trials, not clinical questions. That might lead to a difference, it might not. But personally, I think this is a good question. How much of our time should we spend doing stuff with trials that are high risk of bias? If we discuss them, if we present their results, if we talk about them, we put their stuff in the abstract, are we giving oxygen to work that frankly does not deserve oxygen because it is rubbish? By merely talking about them, you give credibility to something that is far from deserving that credibility. Should we ban conclusions of the type that are currently in my own review? Essentially, we need more research. What use is that conclusion? None. I wrote it, it's rubbish. It's completely unhelpful. We don't need to know we need more research. We need something more than that. What sort of research? If we're thinking about this trial-forged trial pathway, what we want to know is what are the trials and the trial questions that are now needed, given that you have just spent the last 3 years looking at all of the evidence in this particular field. We don't want to know we need more trials, or we need better trials. We need something more. So what sort of details should we be giving? Is a question I think we should be asking ourselves. Now I'm, together with a whole raft of people, updating that recruitment review right now. And here are some things we're going to put into that review. This has not been floated past Cochrane yet. So we're quite curious as to what Cochrane are going to make of this. But this is what we're suggesting. Early on in our review, we say we have not excluded trials that we have judged to be at high risk of bias. They're in the review. They're in our table of included studies. However, we are not going to present anything at all about them in the results, and we are not going to mention them at all in the discussion, because to do so would be a complete waste of our time. It would give them oxygen. They don't deserve oxygen. They are rubbish. My PhD student, Heidi Gardner, who's involved with this, thinks we should invent in Cochrane a new Table 2. Table 1, the table of included studies, low risk of bias, and Table 2, the table of shame, where you put in the high risk of bias, but included. And that is the end of it. You don't talk about them anymore, you don't discuss anything, you just say, they're in, they're rubbish. So we have put the data into data analysis. There was discussion in our review team as to whether that was a good idea or not. Opinion was divided. We have put them in. We have a little line somewhere saying, look, we've put them in. We think readers should look to them only to give themselves potentially some ideas about which types of interventions are worthy of further, better evaluation. you should pay no attention to the effect information that comes from them because they're rubbish. That's all we say about them. We do not talk then about 32 out of 68 of our studies. There is not a single word about them in our review, the update, apart from where we say they are rubbish. That's all we say about them. Our draft implications for research, now we have a discussion section, as we all do. In that section, we only talk about those studies that are at low risk of bias or uncertain. We give the uncertains the benefit of the doubt. And we've got about a page. And our implications for research, the current draft, is also about a page. So neither of them are particularly long, but we've given both about the same amount of space. So we say which future trials should be done. These are the trials. And we say why. So Declan has led an initiative called Priority, which is putting forward suggestions as to the top 10 priority questions in recruitment in trials. So it would seem sensible that when we say which evaluations should be done in the future, what future research should be done, that it should consider directly two things. One, the findings of the review. So we've spent years updating this thing. It ought to be directly influenced by that. And also external initiatives such as Declan's that talk about the priority topics in recruitment research, which is what it does. And we want to go further when we say, and how should you do them? We do not want to say, it would be nice if you could make them a bit better. What we've said is, here are protocols. This is the research design you should use to evaluate these interventions. These are the priority interventions that come from this review, that mesh with the priority process, and these are the protocols you should follow. We don't want you using your initiative much. These are the protocols. We don't want to spend decades looking at another 200 high risk of bias studies. Do them like this, because these are the concrete uncertainties that we have identified in our review. Our review has 72 comparisons, 68 included studies. We have 7 where we can pool more than one study. What that says to us is that most evaluations are evaluated once. People dream up something, test it once, nobody then replicates it. We remain in a situation for decades with high uncertainty. Even if the study is done well, which some of these are, well done, single evaluation. But it's a single evaluation. We do not want to change practice for a single evaluation, even if it's well done. Unless it was perhaps a giant one. And none of these are. So we want to be guiding people. That's one of the things that the Trial Forge initiative is suggesting, as have others. What we need is coordination and a bit more collaboration. Don't just sit there and dream something up. Look to these sorts of things and say, this is right now where the greatest uncertainties are. This is where I can make a really important contribution to reducing a known uncertainty, and I will do it well. And I think Cochrane has a very, very clear role in directing those decisions that we do not use to a sufficient extent right now. For our work with the method stuff, we suggest that people should look to this register of questions, and our protocols, those 3 I'm talking about, will be in this register. So this is another Irish initiative. This is from Belfast. There's Mike Clark and colleagues behind this. So again, what we're saying is the protocol will be in here. It will be public. Everybody can look at it. Everybody can follow it. We will then hoover it up in our review, the results of it, and we'll reduce uncertainty. So at the next update, what we're really looking for is, let's say we have those 3 interventions, we want that cleared up. These things work or they do not. We've cleared it up in a year or 2. Some of the interventions in here, there is a decade between the first evaluation and the second. It's nonsense. We just need to give much more guidance, more coordinated effort if we are to reduce some of these uncertainties. And Cochrane has a fabulous opportunity to influence these sorts of decisions. What are the important research questions that need answered based on the last 2 years of our life spent collating all of this stuff? This is the last slide. So, this is why we should make more noise. As we heard right at the beginning, Cochrane has influence. It influences guideline recommendations. It influences funding decisions. It influences the sorts of trials that get done. We have an opportunity then to give much more explicit pointers to what sort of research is required. Cochrane reviews also take a lot of time. So our search in that recruitment update ended in December 2015. And here we are in May 2017, and we're tidying it up. It's taken a long time. That time should not be spent dealing with stuff which does not deserve attention. I think that's important. Cochrane reviews take a long time. Why spend any of your time dealing with stuff that does not deserve your time? I think it would also send a message, perhaps not strong enough, but let's try, to trialists, to funders, to ethics committees, that if your design is judged by us to be of high risk of bias, you are in danger of being in Heidi Gardner's Table 2, Table of Shame. We are not going to waste our time with your nonsense. Why should we? Why should we? We have so much uncertainty around what you've done, we do not trust it. We will look to studies that have been done well. When it comes to those research implications, usually a review team has spent a long time looking at that evidence. We certainly have. I wonder how long Feinberg and the team spent looking at those 244 studies, all of which were at high risk of bias. How long did Cochrane spend dealing with that 1,400-page review? So if you've spent years looking at a body of work, you and your team are in a very good position to make judgments as to where the most important uncertainties remain. You're in a very good position. You've been looking at this for years. You should be confident enough, bold enough to say in very clear language, this is the trial design or trial designs that are needed in the future. Not this, but this. These are the outcomes where we have found little or nothing that's of decent quality. This is what we should be looking at. Not a vague statement, as we currently have in our recruitment review, more research is needed. But something very explicit, something very bold that makes it much clearer. Cochrane reviews can be very influential. And the funding body that I sit on, we absolutely insist on Cochrane reviews as part of the application. So if you're proposing a trial, we want to know what the systematic review literature says. What we're really wanting is a Cochrane review. What does the Cochrane review in this area say? That's what we're looking for. If there is a Cochrane review and you are proposing something different, the chances of getting funding from our committee are very slim. This lot has spent years looking at this evidence. You're proposing something different. That's a bit weird. Why would we? I mean, we might. Potentially they might make a splendid case. But they've got a job on their hands. We, as reviewers, can make very bold statements that can stop some of this research that is of little or no relevance, or poor. There's a whole another presentation set on studies that answer questions that nobody cares about, either because they're just irrelevant or because somebody answered them 10 years ago. So there are lots of work on cumulative meta-analysis looking at, well, actually that question was answered a long time ago. We, as reviewers, can help stop that, I think, by being much bolder in our research implications, much more concrete than we are. Cochrane is a platform. That reputation that Cochrane has for being the gold standard in systematic review evidence is a platform. It is a voice that we have, that we should use much, much more to inform the research agenda. And we absolutely have a role to play in reducing the amount of complete cobblers that comes out of the primary research body of work. Why is it that table that I showed early on, by far the largest proportion of those included studies were judged to be at high risk of bias? Why is that allowed? Think of those patients, members of the public. What is this thing, low quality of evidence, of which you speak? Why are you doing that? Why are we doing that? We have a platform and we should use it. Thank you very much.